Yeah, so cows can save the world, which is probably the exact opposite that most people have heard if you listen to mainstream media or any of these movies on Netflix. So the current perceptions are red meat is harmful to human health, cows are harmful to the environment, and it's unethical to kill animals for food. So these are the major three things that anti-meat activists will tell you, vegan propaganda will tell you, and it turns out that actually none of them are really true once you dig into them. So we're going to go one by one through those. So I believe that cows can save human health. Red meat is a superfood. People like to talk about, berries from the Amazon or, some like wacky little, gimmick that they try to make money on. But really the superfood is animal foods, and we've known this for all of history. So this is a big question to me. Most people know that meat was crucial in development as humans, yet we're told today that somehow it's bad for us. It's really interesting how that works, where you ask the same person this, and they'll say, yeah, I see the cave paintings, yeah, we ate animals. But then they're like, oh yeah, but it's bad for you. Like, why? Why is red meat bad for you? They can't tell you. So when you start looking at the other side of things, we can show correlation between, people who eat fruits and vegetables are healthy. People who eat grains might be healthy. But that doesn't tell us that the grains are healthy. When you look at the opposite side, what about the reverse correlation? So that's really interesting when you look at Asian populations, because they don't have this negative image of red meat. And so in Hong Kong, they eat the most meat in the world. They eat the most animal foods in the world. And guess what? They also have the longest life expectancy. So this is a very hard one for these anti-meat people to explain, right? Why would that be? So this is a great study too, that the risk of mortality for total meat intake and provided evidence of an inverse association with red meat. So this is another great example of why we can't use these correlational studies to try to say that meat is bad. So here's the graph of all the modern hunter-gatherers that we study. 73% of these societies got over 50% of their diet from animal foods. And of course, none of them were vegan, 0. So in my journeys, talking to a ton of people, over 150 people, I talked to Dr. David Klorfeld, who's a member of the working group that decided meat was a carcinogen. And I did a long podcast with him. I had to get special clearance to do this with him. And he told me there was a ton of vegans and vegetarians on the panel. They were ignoring evidence, that they did not have the interest of science in mind. They purposely did not look at studies. So here we have a visualization of what happened. There was actually only 15 studies that showed that red meat were good and 14 that showed red meat were bad. I mean, it's basically a toss-up. So there's also the difference between the relative risk and the absolute risk. And so just an example, after all these studies they looked at, they only found that the meat and cancer had a 0.18% risk factor. But then when we looked at cigarettes and cancer, when we looked at the epidemiology, it was 10 to 30% risk factor. So this is something that we should look more into. So what the real problem is, and I think everyone here kind of knows this, it's the processed foods, right? We look at the foods we've been eating for all of history, and we're trying to blame them now for some reason, when look at the foods that just came into existence. Maybe that's the problem. So what is regenerative agriculture? What does that mean? How does it work? Well, when grass grows, there's a life cycle, and there's an optimum grazing point where we want the cows to be eating the grass right at that cross section. So it doesn't want to be too old, but it wants to be just right in the age when it's the most nutritious, but also it's going to be stimulated by those cows eating it, and it will grow again. So this is called rotational grazing, right? When we're going to eat the grass, and the timing of it is very important. So this mimics nature, right? So this looks kind of like what the ancient bison might have looked like years ago, and they're in packs, and they move on the land, and they eat the grass, and then they move, right? And they move on, and it lets it rest and grow back. So now we can do that with simple things like this electric fence that's solar powered, and you can manage a lot of livestock with a simple little wire. So this is what it would look like. You could start the cows in the top right, and you move them each day. By the time you get them back around, the grass is ready to go again. And this does amazing. This is like the basics of why rotational grazing works. So there's a guy named Alan Savory that I actually just interviewed and might visit in Zimbabwe, who's doing this on a global scale. And he's been doing this since the 1960s, really. He's talking about holistic management. And this is the stuff that happens when you correctly put cows on grass. Desertification happens when cows are not on land. So this is an example of them, just using more cattle on the same area. I don't know exactly how many years this was, but they actually do the opposite of what vegans will have you think, that they actually improve the soil and they help grow grass back. So we have a huge amount of cropland in the world. People say, oh, well, there's not enough land to do this. This is great. Regenerative farming is great, but we don't have enough land to do this. Well, we actually do. For one, if we don't use all this cropland for corn, wheat, and soy, which we know is not healthy for us, we could use some of this land for cows. And then also here is some of this rangeland. So vegans will also like to say, oh, there's so much land used for animal agriculture, it's terrible. It's like, no, it's actually good. Like we said, like Alan Savory has shown, he did an amazing TED Talk, by the way, that you can check out, that animals, ruminants on grass help the soil, and this land cannot be used otherwise. Here's another topic that's really hard to get into because it's personal, right? It's ethics. I don't want to eat meat because I believe it's bad. So I'm going to have Terika tour an amazing farmstead. She has her own farm. She raises all her own animals by hand from scratch. She loves them. And let's play this video real quick. This is not exactly from Food Lies, but.
On our farm, we have some pigs that do their piggy thing in the forest. We have ducks that live on a pond, and we have meat rabbits and turkeys and chickens, and we have both meat and dairy cattle that are all just solely grass-fed, including the dairy cattle. And we raise our animals from when they're born until when they die. This idea that we can unplug from death, that we can not be a part of this horrible machine of death by opting out, by not eating animals. To me, I believe that's a stunted thought. We get to the point of discomfort because something had to die for us to live. And so we stop there and decide, well, therefore I'm going to back up and not eat whatever had to die for me to get there. Well, everything has death around it. Anything that's alive had to die for you to eat. We can say that the natural world has always had it figured out, and that we can be in that system and we can mimic systems so that we can have food like with ruminants moving through and stuff like that. Or we can say, I don't like death, so I'm not going to eat things that had to die, and so I'm just going to eat foods that are not from an animal. Unfortunately, to do that, you have to destroy entire ecosystems to grow your food. And I cannot tell you about the amount of life that's around us right now. There's all sorts of birds, there's toads, there's snakes, there's bears back there, there's coyotes back there. And that's just the stuff on the surface. Like, we're not even talking about what's going on in the soil and everything else that's around us. So in order for me to grow the food that will not kill anything, I'll have to kill all this. I'm going to have to strip the soil. I'm going to have to level everything out. I'm going to have to steal water out of vast aquifers so that we can irrigate the shit out of this place, because it's not going to have any water retention possibility anymore. I am going to take all the fertility out of the soil, because to level this, I've got to do that. I will end up with a moonscape. It's death in a plate, there's just no blood. It's the same thing times a million. It's much worse. It's not one animal who lives a good life, who moves through within a biodiverse system, who contributes to that system the way that whoever created all this figured out long before us, much smarter than us, and that is contributing and is part of it, just like we should be part of it. We should be part of this too. We're here, we're gone, and while we're here, we need to be living as close as we possibly can to how we're supposed to be living, and that includes our diets.
Every time she says that line, I get the chills, and it's really emotional for me. It's death on a plate, there's just no blood. This is one of the main things I wish the anti-meat activists would understand, is there is no life without death. This is a harmonious cycle. This is how nature works. You can't get outside of it. You can stick your head in the sand and pretend you're not killing something, but that's not how nature works. 55 sentient animals' lives lost to produce 100 kilograms of usable plant protein. That's 25 times more killings than to produce the same amount of rangelands beef. Over half the mice taken by predators after harvest, so that's 80% decrease in population. So either they're killed immediately or they starve to death because they don't have their food source anymore. So there's so many more examples of this, of people have probably heard this by now, of animals getting chopped up in the combines, or we're diverting huge waterways to create this land to grow monocrops, and it kills ecosystems. So many animals die that we can't even calculate from the way we do monocrops, corn, wheat, and soy. So the biggest question here is, what is the alternative, right? So this is the big ethical argument is, well, we need an alternative. We can't just live off of air. So part of the story is that animals are going to die in nature either way. And it's not a good death. Animals don't just die of old age in an old cow's home and, get like all their little meals for them and some morphine if they're feeling bad. They get eaten alive, or they get sick and die, or they starve to death. So there is no alternative. Like, if you think about this ethical argument, you have to think about the alternative. You can't just think, well, I don't want an animal to die for me to eat, because that's not the question. There's another idea here that we could do cell-based meat, plant-based, slop we'll throw together in a factory. This does not work either. There are so many inputs. If you think about all the refrigeration, all the shipped in ingredients, the chemicals, the preservatives, all the stuff that's going on to make this meat, it's actually more, I think, if you actually look at all the inputs, than it would take to just use regular beef, or let alone regeneratively grown beef. You can throw a cow on a pasture, you have sun, you have grass, and you have food. So I think this is a terrible idea, and this is the wrong direction we should be going in. So here's another thing. We're kind of in this little world, we're in America, where we have nice air conditioning and this nice conference. But on a worldwide scale, livestock helps the billion poorest people the most. And we can't ignore this. They rely on these animals for their livelihood. And they would think it's absurd for you to tell them that, oh, eating meat's bad for you, or what are you doing? That's bad for the environment. Like, hey, I'm trying to survive. I'm trying to feed my family. What are you talking about? So here's one more. We have this alternative. People don't ever think about this. The products made from cattle, you think, oh yeah, we just get beef, and they're like doing all these calculations. Oh, look how much water it takes. Okay, what about all the products that we also make from the animal? We use the bones, we use the hide. None of the animal is wasted. It's amazing how many are. There's more than this. I don't know if it's too small to read, but there are probably hundreds and hundreds of products that would all have to take synthetic inputs. We'd be using fossil fuels, we'd be using plastics, we'd be using all these other things to try to accomplish this. And that is the exact opposite of what we want to do. So basically, the message is cows can save the world. They save human health, as we've presented, Dr. Eads did a great job of showing us how, through all of history, this is what we've been eating, and it continues to be a human health food. Cows can save on healthcare costs. If we just all started maybe eating more beef, and maybe we replace the cereal or the bread with some more beef. I'm saying everyone has to be a carnivore. No, we don't have to be Sean Baker, crushing steaks for breakfast. But we can replace some of these harmful foods, and we can change our health. They can change the environment. We can use this land in a different way. Instead of corn, wheat, and soy, we have the land. We have millions and millions of acres. If we could figure out a system, some sort of incentive system where farmers could be rewarded for some people call like a carbon credit, where if you regenerate the soil, then we can give these people compensation for that. Instead of giving them subsidies for growing corn, wheat, and soy, we can give them subsidies to change their operation, to use animals, use regenerative agriculture, rotational grazing, holistic management, whatever you want to call it. And then lastly, is the ethical part is there really is no alternative. And it's just it's an absurd thought. It's sort of this pie in the sky like ideal that, like a vegan in a coffee shop will tell some other vegan in a coffee shop that has never visited a farm, has never, seen this. I've been to these farms. I know these people. They love their animals. They care for them. It's their number one priority to keep them healthy. Of course it is. It's how they make a living. And of course they're not insane psychopaths. They don't want to hurt animals. So I think the main problem is the disconnection between nature and humans living in cities. And Tara Couture, the lovely woman who I interviewed, is writing a book about death, and she thinks this is like the biggest thing, is that we are disconnected from death. If we were, all these problems in society are kind of around meat are basically because we are so disconnected. In the past, before a child would even learn to talk, they would have seen dozens of deaths. They would have seen their family kill a chicken or a cow for their food, and it would be part of their life. Now we have vegans in coffee shops trying to say that it's somehow not human, and they're trying to rewrite history. And that's it. That's my message. I think we should not listen to them. And I think I'm making a film called Food Lies, and we will be exploring all of these things. Thank you.